I'm Paul Heron, and this is episode 51 of the Anais Nin podcast. And do we have a treat for you? Today I will talk to Eduardo Sanchez's comrade for the last 15 years of his life, the palmist, astrologer, and author Judith Hipskind Collins, about her unique memories of Eduardo and his cousin Anais Nin. The following actually began as a telephone conversation, but ended up, because of its spontaneity and free-form content, a new podcast episode. Let's waste no time and listen in. Judy, welcome to the Anais Nin podcast.
Oh, Paul, it's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to talking with you.
Okay, so the first question is, who was Eduardo Sanchez? How would you describe him as someone who knew him quite well, intimately actually? How would you describe him? Who is this man?
Okay, that of course is a kind of a question with vast and nearly impenetrable answers, because that's who he was, a vast character, impenetrable. He was mercurial to the max. On the other hand, he was quite stalwart. Whatever he believed in, that he would not be swayed. But he had this incredible mercurial quality in daily life, living through the day, observing things. He was, I think, one of the most quick-witted people I ever met. And, his powers of observation, even in his 70s, he was something like 72 when I met him. And I just never met a sharper observer. And then whatever he might want to communicate of what he'd seen, it was so quick, so witty. But he was astonishing. He could make you laugh, but you have to keep in mind that he had this incredible intellect. So to keep up with some of his thought processes as he was observing things, you had to be a little bit on your toes. And he enjoyed nature above all. So there was a tremendous amount about nature, that we talked about, shared. That means long, long walks. And, he could never get enough of nature. That's just kind of his everyday personality. What I enjoyed most about him was not only what I've just said, but he had a hobby. Now, this is so fun. Keep in mind, his whole life as a researcher, the level just from his book. The passionate energy that went into every kind of research, a lot of which is not even reflected in the round. A lot of it came after he wrote the round. But he was always digging for something. If he could find something out that interested him, he was in heaven. That was his thing. Just to know something, just to find it out, just to get an answer, just to have the search. Well, I was so fascinated because when he loved to always say, "I'm retired," and he said that a lot. But what he decided to do in his retirement, he was a walker. He walked miles and miles and miles on a weekly basis, several miles a day at the time I met him. Okay, one of his haunts, so to speak, was the whole Southern Methodist University campus. That's just one. But sticking to that, his favorite activity was to find things that careless students had left on the ground. And that was
really?
funny. Oh, good Lord. You cannot imagine what he collected, what he had, what he found. There was a place called, like the dog, Poochie, and Poochies had drinks. Poochies had red cups, just like any soda cup you'd get, like a medium-sized soda cup. He collected those red cups that were empty, of course, sticky, I'm sure, washed them all off. He had whole pillars in his apartment, many feet high, of these cups that he collected. And it was an astonishing thing. I can't even remember. I would have to give it more thought to elaborate on anything the students left on the ground, but that's what came into his apartment.
That is interesting.
But he'd be so happy, at the end of the day, maybe a lot of the times I went to his house at the end of the day because I was working, and whatever he had found for the day, he was ecstatic. It gets better. He had 2 couches in his place, and there was a regular one you sat on, but he had a dining area, and he had put a couch in there, and it started kind of innocently and kind of slowly, but because he loved color, he was beyond taken with color. Well, that's back in the day. They started having rather colorful Kleenex boxes. Do not ask me because I haven't a clue where he would find all these empty Kleenex boxes. Or maybe they weren't even empty, but when I saw them, they were. And not one, not one was dirty. I don't know what he did to clean them up. And he started by setting the first 2 or 3 on the couch. It didn't take very long. I don't know if it took a year. The entire couch was Kleenex boxes. I'm talking the arms, the back, everything, and in the front. Then the whole couch, you couldn't tell it was a couch. And then coming up, he designed these things. I felt like on some unconscious level he was a frustrated architect, more in a standard sense. He certainly was an architect of knowledge, but he just had this urge to build, and it came out that way. As to his ironic sense of humor, his brother-in-law, Jack, had sent him a pair of suspenders from England, and Eduardo hung them from the chandelier in his dining room. Later on, his brother-in-law sent him a pair of at least 6-inch high wedgies. They were some sort of theater prop. No one was out there in 6-inch high wedgies, and they were red leather. Those went on the chandelier with the suspenders from England. It was all part of him creating his own world once he had retired, and that is actually a pretty deep part of him. So.
Wow.
Okay.
I think that's fascinating, actually.
It honestly is, Paul, and if you could have seen it, and to watch him spot, he never missed anything. And my favorite story is just on how he could spot. It was, I swear, it was an unconscious drive and mechanism in him. He had so perfected that search that one day we'd gone to some appointment. We were in a high-rise in Dallas. We were on, maybe a 2nd or 3rd level of a parking garage, and we're walking back to the car. And my point in saying that it was the 2nd or 3rd level, it wasn't very bright. It was kind of darkish. Okay, we're just walking to the car, and I'm opening the driver's door. He's going around to the passenger side, and I didn't really realize that he had bent down. So when he got in the seat, and he said, "Oh, look, I found something interesting." I just loved the way he said it, and what he held out in his hand was a $20 bill. The parking garage. But I thought I found something interesting. And he insisted I take it. Oh, my word. You couldn't stop him. So life was a fiesta with Eduardo and all his brilliant colors and collections in his place. It was fun. It really was. Now, so what was he like? He was born in Havana because his mother went to Havana to have her children. He lived in and grew up in Camagüey, and I think it was a little area called Nuevitas. But he grew up in Camagüey. That's where the business was. It was Eduardo's grandfather who started all the family business. Eduardo's father, when they had their first son, was Eduardo's oldest brother, Bernabe. There were 7 children, and I'll say this, that his father, Bernabe, married a woman of Danish extraction named Anais Colmel. You would know that name. And that was Eduardo's mother's name. And, so those were his parents. And there were 7 children, and Bernabe was born in 1899. Cuca, whose name, I found this fascinating, Paul. Cuca's name is Caridad, Caridad. That is the name of one of the companies the grandfather founded. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
So it was clearly a family business. But I thought that's no accident she has that name. It was called El Señalado to begin with, and they broke it down into La Caridad and one other name, I forget which. Now we've gotten heavy on the paternal side with the same father's name, grandfather. We've got Caridad for the first girl. Well, then they went into honoring the Danish side of the family, and a name that went through the whole Danish side a lot, which you will recognize, is Torvald, like Anais's brother. After Cuca, Torvald was born.
I see.
And then Eduardo. So he was the 4th child. They had 3 more girls, Graciela, Anais, and Anna Maria. She was the youngest, and Anna Maria was born in 1912, and I knew her. She was kind of an interesting character. Anna Maria is the reason that Eduardo moved to Dallas while Eduardo was in Florence. That was his last big stay in Europe. There was a great flood. Eduardo helped out in the flood. I'm assuming it was in Florence because that's where he was living. That flood happened so suddenly in 1965 that a lot of books, stored in basements and lower levels, ancient, wonderful things, well, they just got inundated. Nobody was prepared. And Eduardo worked for a very long time rescuing those books. I mean, he worked in swampy water, and then I think he helped for a while on whatever restoration progress could be made, after they got the books out. And that was his last great big gig, and it was 65, 66. And at that point, he left Florence and he came to Texas. And what he told me was, and he really meant this, he had this old-fashioned Cuban idea that it was a man's duty to care for, and I'm quoting, weak females. And he considered me one of those, although he knew I wasn't a weak female. But that was a category that the men had. So right, he came back to Texas, Houston, and he said, because I was the only unattached male in the family without, any other obligations, he felt that it was incumbent on him to come to Houston and be with Anna Maria, support her in any way he could. He decided once she was widowed, she wanted to move to Dallas. Now, this had all happened in 65, and I met Eduardo in 1976. So over that 11-year period, he had moved to Dallas. After Anna Maria had stayed a couple of years there, with her daughter and her grandkids, and Eduardo there, always wanting to be a support to her, but at the same time, as soon as he landed in Dallas, he discovered the Bridwell Library, and he located himself right at the SMU campus and began all his friendship and more research in their library. Then Anna Maria, she met a man, which was great, and she remarried, and he was a Jewish lawyer, and they moved to New York. And I love this story because his last name was Menikoff, so she became, of course, Anna Maria Menikoff, and she was some sort of important attorney. And he did something for the Sanchez family that had not been done, which is he managed to get all of the heirs some sort of huge compensation from the U.S. government because Castro had expropriated all their business. And so Eduardo had a lifetime credit for his taxes that could not ever be used up as his share.
Wow.
So whoever was living, because I'm thinking they were all alive, but I'm not sure. No, I would have to say Bernabe and Torvald would have been gone. But Kuka was alive. Kuka was incredible. She was formidable. Oh my God, you never met a woman like Kuka. I loved her, but she was powerful. I mean, she could talk circles around anyone. She could give you a look. I mean, she and Eduardo were two of the most powerful people I've ever met. I think Anais was also in her own way, but entirely different, much more diffuse. Well, of course, Eduardo being so hidden, you would think, what power? People could look at him and just back off. He looked so powerful and distinguished. Kuka looked like an ordinary woman, but you didn't mess with her. You did not mess with her. And Jack used to tell me so many stories. Sometimes when I was visiting them in New York, we three'd be sitting together and he'd tell the stories. But Jack and I talked for all the years that I was with Eduardo. Jack and I talked every Sunday. He called me every Sunday.
Jack is her husband, right?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. Yes, Jack Helm, Helm. He was born in 1920 in Indianapolis, grew up in Indianapolis area. He was adopted. He doesn't know his parents. He suspected maybe it was actually his aunt and husband that raised him. You could follow the rest of the train. The assumption was that his mother may have been unwed or whatever. And then she was portrayed as the aunt, and the aunt was portrayed as the mother. Jack was very, very close to Eduardo because it was the people in his life at the point I met him, because, of course, he was older and retired and not in Florence with his other people or anybody else in Europe. Of course, Anais was not in any condition in 76, where she was very much at the end of her rope. So it was basically in his life, Jack and Kuka. And he was so close to both of them. Between those two and Eduardo, the three of them together, you could not find more witty, insightful people, but just witty. I mean, you really had to be able to keep up with them. Otherwise, they might have thought you were dull, boring, or a fool. I'm just saying. They were a challenge in a good sense. They were just wonderful. Oh, my God. And I think that's why Jack and Kuka and Eduardo were so close. They were so alike. And Eduardo shared so much of his finer life that he created for himself in Florence. And he was, he's the one that discovered a great deal about Bronzino. He was a Renaissance artist with red hair, so they called him, that was his nickname. And Eduardo did the work, that whatever they know about him today, he found out during his researches. There's letters attesting to that in the Bridwell Library. He was able to purchase quite a few, before Bronzino got even more known, thanks to Eduardo, he had purchased quite a few of the original paintings, and they were in their New York apartment, and they were really quite lovely. So I would love to, I had correspondence from various members of Eduardo's family, that's fine. But you know what I really, really, really want? Sometimes I think of it, it's in the attic, who knows where. Hugo. I had the nicest correspondence from Hugo for some time, you know, on his husband. And it was just, he and I had such a rapport, because, you know, we both loved astrology. I guess they all loved astrology in that family, you know.
Yeah. Hugo just had a way of writing. His letters were so, I don't know, elegant.
Oh, he was elegant to the max, yes. I just loved him. I mean, he was really something. He wasn't like Mormon Fuzzy, but he was elegant and tuned in, and I don't know. But he cared so much for Anais that it was a good outlet for him to have Sharon Spencer and so on, and some of us around. I think that really meant a lot to him. And certainly they were around much more than I. Me being in Texas with Eduardo, I wasn't around that much. But as I keep saying that I made these trips to New York, well, you know, on occasion, then Hugo, when he was still able, he would have me for dinner. It would just be the two of us, and he'd be in the kitchen cooking. And then one night we sat there, and he ran all those films on a 16 millimeter to show me. And I thought, it doesn't get any better than that, you know, with the creator of the films showing them to you as the two of you are sitting there. You know, it's pretty wonderful, really.
I want to change the subject to Eduardo's only book, The Round. This book was published originally in 1942 in a run of only 125 copies, and there are probably not too many of them left around today. I'm lucky enough to have one in my possession.
How'd you get one? The original? Where'd you get it? Wonderful.
Well, I went to an antiquarian bookseller, and they had The Round.
Did you just Google, how'd you find that antiquarian? That's astonishing.
Yeah, I typed in The Round by Edward Santiago, and it popped up. And then when I got it, I opened the cover, and I couldn't believe my eyes, because there was a sticker on the inside of the cover that had the name Martha Jaeger, who was Anais' psychologist in the 1940s. And it was her personal copy. It was her personal copy.
Oh, my word. Isn't that wonderful? For instance, that the heirs or somebody didn't just throw it out, you know, and it got into a bookstore. My gosh. Oh, my goodness.
And I used that book to make the facsimile.
I am so thrilled, and it's such a journey. I mean, you having contacted me back when you did, and did I ever hear of The Round? It's such a journey spanning about 50 years, 76. Yeah, it will be 50 years, I guess, next year. My original perspective, you know, is so different of that book, and I thought it was just this sort of priceless but not so usable book. And I'm so glad you've changed the equation, because there was that copy hidden in the Bridwell, and then, as it happened, the copy I have, Jack and Kuka gave to me. And that means Eduardo's original book is still in the Bridwell. I wanted them to know what they had. As I've told you, they don't know what they have, because our communication ended around 1992, and who would say? I really felt they didn't know. And when they remodeled and took Eduardo's stuff, it was in about 42 cardboard cartons that were a little over knee-high, maybe. My concern, of course, was that Eduardo's work, which was never truly organized, ever, but when I was researching it in its old location, it at least was semi-sorted. So you had astrology in one trunk, you had all of his art historian stuff in another trunk, you had all his Medici research and Renaissance and all in a third, so kind of three categories. Well, once they dumped everything into 40-some cartons, and I went over to investigate, because, again, the director that was Eduardo's friend for 25 years, he had gone to Austin to head up the Harry T. Ransom Center at UT. So we had all these interim directors. So I had the curator bring out several boxes, and that I could see opening them, and there was no order. They just stuffed those boxes full. And I thought it was just criminal to have a bunch of cartons sitting around with Eduardo's valuable stuff. It bothered me. It was on my conscience that before I pass away, I needed to make it known. And of course, you helped kick the ball starting right now. Coming back to this month, July, and their directors' meeting, the Bridwell Library director himself was there, and he went ballistic. He's now informed. He's quite enthusiastic about the whole thing. He's already digging in the collection. So I feel beyond elated because I feel like my job, I'm not going to die and leave Eduardo unknown. And he wants to get with me eventually, and he wants to do an oral history for the library. I thought, oh my God, this far exceeds my dreams. You know, my concern was along the way when we're ever talking or doing any other publicity for the book, it's in my mind, if those things of Eduardo's are to be used, people have got to go see them. And I hope they do. You've heard me say it before. I want somebody who can read all those books of Eduardo's and find out what the heck it is that he has about the Medici family that no one else has. Quoting verbatim from Eduardo. He has hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes and untold hundreds of birth dates that he got himself from registries in Europe and set up the chart in the quest that is similar to the book. As you know, he didn't do personal charts. But let me tell you, he was so clever. I guess, honestly, if you said sum him up in one word, clever, in the best sense of the word, that was Eduardo. But he was a little bit imaginative, and so often you would lose that quality because he was an honest-to-God researcher. He was going for facts, but he had an imaginative side. There was a character, this French writer, Rabelais, okay? That was one of Eduardo's favorite people. And Rabelais had a hero in his work, whose name I now forget, but I used to know it 50 years ago. All right, that hero, Eduardo did a study turning that hero into Rabelais himself as an alter ego, or even deeper, by constructing, he did read Rabelais' chart. Then reading the work with this, whoever this, the hero, the main character was, Eduardo psyching out he read every word. I mean, he was a fanatic about Rabelais. And by the way, he was a fanatic about William Blake. But at any rate, he constructed his own chart for the character that Rabelais had, the main character in his writing. And Eduardo came up with the conclusion that the character was an alter ego to Rabelais. It was very, very important research, I thought, but it's not out in the public, so that's over there. It's just he did so. I mean, to use his detective abilities that way was just genius. And then make a chart, and then find out that it corresponded so much to Rabelais' own that it must be Rabelais was using himself entirely for that character. So that's an example. That Eduardo, he really very, very clever. And occasionally, I mean, he would just have fantasies and way off the wall, and we'd be talking, and he'd just, rather than being a researcher and sticking to facts, he just had all these fantasies. But what I consider more important is that research that he did that you know about, and all the cyclical stuff that's in the round, and millennia, and he managed to take, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, so recently discovered, compared to millennia, and he took them back in time. I don't know how he ever found the technical material to go back, Babylonian or beyond astrology. He had placements. In other words, once Neptune and Uranus and Pluto, they were discovered, you can work it out backwards, even though they weren't, Anyway, he had the planetary positions for these three planets going back millennia backwards. And then, similar to drawing the main character from Rabelais' chart that he created and trying to compare it to Rabelais, he took every one of those cycles that were ancient cycles, 1 in 2,000 years or more before those planets were discovered, and he projected it. Once they began to cover history, what little we know of history, he did that same kind of detective work, and he was able to describe each cycle when it repeated itself and project what might happen. And at the time, surrealism and André Breton came into view around 1880, 1882. That is when those three outer planets had returned. This is from Eduardo. I know nothing about it. Those three planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, had returned to the exact same positions they had at the beginning of the Dark Ages. So Eduardo was so fond of saying to me, and it would come up every so often, whatever, we might be just discussing something, and he would conclude, well, my dear, I'm sorry to have to tell you again, we are in the Dark Ages. And we are now. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah. And what bugs the heck out of me is he always told me what year that cycle would be over. And I promise it's kind of like right around now, although it seems like we're dug in worse than ever. And if I were ever to get myself to the Bridwell Library in Dallas, if I could get my hands on his notes one more time, what I really would want to say is, let me find, please God, the date. And I really think it was 20-something. Well, we're in 20-something, but I mean, I think it was like 22, 24, 26. I want that date when the Dark Age, parallel ends. But it was a long one from 1880 until now, but that's it. But how fascinating. Wow. I would have to say he was the investigator extraordinaire. But just to describe his personality, it's what I've said: mercurial, witty, and very stalwart, and very, very stubborn in a good way. I mean, he's very set, if he was set. And that's in his chart. I mean, he had Moon and Mercury both in Taurus, and that is the first primary stubborn sign, the bull with the horns. And of course, the trouble was, or the blessing was, I'm equally as stubborn with my Taurus moon, so we shared the same moon. The other thing you have to say is he went miles on a journey to be totally reclusive. When you said, one of your questions in my text is, what was he known for? He was known for being, smarter than anybody else, but he was known for being a recluse, period. That was his gig. And he just could not hide enough. It was actually a career to not be known. It's kind of crazy. As much as he wanted to know things, he didn't want anybody to know him. And he had a friend named Marne, M-A-R-N-E, Ames, E-A-M-E-S, who was a very close friend of his, like probably on the order of Blanche, from a different part of his life, and she lived in London. And in the 80s, I was paid to go to London and do research at the British Museum by an outfit in Dallas. It was on Druidism and Celtic stuff, and I had a great privilege, Paul, that I was, introduced to and worked with the head of the reading room, the man who was in charge of all the manuscripts throughout history that the British Museum has. That's who I worked with, to research Celtic stuff. When I went to London on the first of those trips, Eduardo was so excited, first of all, for me to have that job and to be going. But he was so excited because he wanted me to meet his friend Marne Ames. And so, of course, he had sent off a letter to her, and she wrote back. I mean, I think she was thrilled to even hear from him because a la Blanche Cooney, nobody ever heard from him again. But she heard from him so that she could meet me. And she had me to tea several times when I was in London. And I learned more about Eduardo sitting with her. That bears out how far he went to either have things his own way or be a recluse, and usually it was both.
Do you think that his reluctance to be known to anyone was the reason that he used a pseudonym, Edward Santiago, to write the round?
Oh, by far, yes, certainly.
Yeah. Okay.
And you remember the story I told you, that when I found that book and took it to my first day in those trunks after Anais arranged for me to go there, I took that book down to the director, who I didn't realize. I was brand new on the scene. I didn't even realize the director was Eduardo's best friend. So Deckard Turner was his name, and his eyebrows shot up to his hairline. And he said, "What? Eduardo wrote a book and never told me?" Oh, my God. So that was it. I mean, that's the end of the story about how hidden he was. This man was entirely in his confidence. But the deal was, he didn't want that book coming out. Not while he was alive. I mean, it violated what he most wanted hidden, which was that book. And I had no clue. Just an innocent old girl coming in to do whatever Anais asked me to do. And there it is. So finally, I just looked at him, and he was so distinguished. No one said boo to him. He did get his way. And I looked at him that first meeting. We just barely got past the first handshake. And he kept repeating as if I had done something terrible. You outed my book. And I said, if you don't stop this, I'm going to put it in the Dallas Morning News. Do you understand? And he quit. I thought, shut up. Not too patient, So that pretty much set the tone. And oh God, what a wonderful journey. But I never dreamed that this book would come out with that kind of a beginning. And I'm thrilled that it is coming out because clearly the world can benefit from it. It's the seeking. It's the heartfelt. It's so mental, but it's so heartfelt, don't you think?
I think so. So I think that we should also touch on how did you ever meet Eduardo in the first place? How'd that happen?
Okay, then the short answer is that Anais introduced us in a way, but being Anais, it wasn't simple. Starting in 1970, I was newly employed at Llewellyn Publications. The publisher, decided that he and the employees were going to take a Jungian dream class that was being offered at the school, which I co-founded with him. That was my job. He called me dean. So I ran the school for him, and we hired this guy, Dennis Stillings was his name. He was quite brilliant. So we had to start, as part of this class, we had to get up in the morning and write our dreams down, directly. It was none of that waking up with a tape recorder in the middle of the night. Just as an exercise, you got out of bed, you went straight to whatever writing table area you wanted, and before you had a glass of water or your breakfast or anything, you wrote down what came to you. I was so taken with the idea that it turned into a journal, and so I did it from 70 through 1985. I recorded my dreams faithfully. Now, that's part one. Let's go to part two. For a period of time, I left St. Paul and Minneapolis to go home and start writing my first palmistry book because my job was so heavy at the publishers. I had that radio and television career. I ran the school. I had a speaking career. I volunteered in prisons and halfway houses under a psychologist at the University of Minnesota, doing what I did in other words, a heavy, heavy volunteer. All that had to come to a halt. So I'm going back to Indiana. I start my book. And I had also been reading palms in a restaurant in Minneapolis, and just prior to moving back to Indiana for a year. And a person had been standing in line reading a book, because there was always a line. I said, "What are you reading?" And that person handed me the book, and it was Anais' diary, whichever volume, probably the first one. And I kind of thumbed through it, and this is absolutely insane, but it's true. I thought that I saw pictures of the south of France in it, but there's never been any pictures of the south of France in Anais' diary. But I wrote down the name and the author. Okay, I move, I come back, now I'm back in St. Paul again, and I'm unpacking. And I had a clear envelope, long, that had folded over in it my insurance papers. And that's all fine. But how it got there beats me. Was a little strip of paper, torn off, with Anais' name and the diary. And I thought, oh my gosh, I wanted to read that book a long time ago. Wasn't that long ago, but over a year, maybe 2 years. So I went to the library, and when I finished my unpacking, and there was a waiting list. So I signed up on the wait list so I could get that diary. I just knew I needed to read it. But that same night of the day that I went to the library and signed up to wait for the book, I had a reunion with a girlfriend. And her name was Margaret Moose, and you can Google her. She was fairly famous. She had a show on PBS, and she reviewed books. So she had reviewed Anais' whatever diary number was out at that point. And, of course, she had done a favorable review, and apparently Anais had her scanning service, and she wrote thank you notes, which she'd mentioned along the way, but I didn't know the scope of it. She wrote thank you notes to any reviewer that she could find that had written anything positive about her. Margaret Moose had a thank you note from the review she did on PBS of one of the diaries. And so I'm having a reunion with her, newly back in town, and it's a wonderful romantic story in that she was in a brownstone in St. Paul whose walls adjoined F. Scott Fitzgerald's home, because they were just obviously still inhabited, these places. She opens her door, and she's got an item in each hand. I thought it was a little unusual to open a door and you're carrying something in each hand. What was in her left hand was the diary of Anais that I had asked for in the library earlier in the day, and in her right hand was a copy of Anais' address from the thank you note that she wrote Margaret for her radio show thing.
Oh, okay.
And she said, read this book. I know you need to read it. And she thrust it in my hand. She said, here's her address. I know you're going to need to write her. Well, I thanked Margaret, and I took the book. I was thrilled to see that. But as she handed me that address, I thought, I'm not writing her. I wouldn't write anybody. But I didn't say that to Margaret. And then about 30 pages into the diary, I had a thing about Russia, and we're not going there, but it's quite mystical. And it involves past lives, if you can believe in such a thing. It involves Tolstoy. It was a very, very, very big part of my life at that point in time. And Anais began talking about some of her Russian friends in Paris, or something to that effect caught my attention. Whatever it was, I wrote her. 1 year after I started corresponding, she replied, and then we started our correspondence. And I told her only that I was a palmist. And eventually she sent me her palm prints. she did that for me. We just started this correspondence. About a year or so later, I can't say when, I had only once typed up a dream, rather than, they were all just in my journals, handwritten, but there was this one I happened to type up, because at the end of the dream, there was a man I was quite fond of, and he came into the dream at the end. So, kind of being in love with him or whatever, I decided to type out the dream. He was an opera singer in Berlin, but he had brought a book to our publisher's company, and I became the editor of his first book. And one day, after that fact, I was just going through some of the paperwork from when I had edited his book, and out of this brown manila envelope came a typewritten copy of a dream. Again, I only did it because he came in at the end. What do you think the dream started out as? There was a woman born in Paris named Toila, T-O-I-L-A. Remember Henry Miller, Un être étoilique? It was on the Yeah. It was a woman named Toila. Oh, this just gives me chills. Whose mission in life was to hide her identity. And in the dream, she and I ended up together on a plane bound for Tahiti. I was on the right side of the aisle. She was on the left side, a few seats in front of me. As the dream went on, she had disguised herself as a nun. That is so fabulous when you consider her life story and, the expurgated diaries. But she had disguised herself as a nun, but I was on to her for whatever reason. I knew this person. And when we landed in Tahiti, she jumped up, and of course this is all a dream, jumped up, and ran down the aisle, and it was one of those deals where you went out the back of the plane with steps leading down to the ramp, they didn't have the jetway or whatever you call it. And so she had vamoosed and was down that back set of steps like nobody's business. And gradually the rest of us, it wasn't that big a plane, being an old-fashioned thing, we were deplaning, all of us. As I got to the back and the ramp and was holding on to the railing, taking the steps down one at a time, there were maybe 3 men there, but they were all there with clipboards. And they said, listen, that woman who came off the plane first, she escaped. She got away from us. We don't know anything about her. And she turned around and told us, contact you, that you're holding all the secrets that she has, and you are to tell us. That was quite a dream, and I paid no attention to it at all because I was concerned about the guy I was in love with. And that was my version of Anais coming for me in a dream. So we began a correspondence where we communicated in dreams, and then we wrote each other the dream and interpreted it. That's my correspondence with her. But I waited quite a while, like I would meet her. And I have a most beautiful letter where she knew I was meeting her on other planes of existence. And she knew as she was getting sicker and sicker, she said, and so I take your hand and we fly together through the sky. She kind of leaned on me in a way through dreams for support as she was dying. But on the surface of the matter, finally, I hated to intrude because I knew she was sick. And I asked, but I just had to do it. I wanted her chart. I had her birth date. I had Noyer, however you say it. I knew her place and date. You can't get anywhere without the time. So I finally just bit the bullet and sent her a letter and said, that I also did astrology. Would she mind sending me her birth time? At that point, I got one of her purple cards back rather than a letter, saying, Dear Judith, my horoscope is in a bank vault. I can't get to it. Okay, but before that purple came, which was about 5 days after I sent my letter, back when the mail worked faster, and I got that card back, in between my sending the letter, her sending her purple card, I had a dream. These are very heightened dreams. They're actually called astral experiences. And in this dream, I opened an envelope from her in the dream, and what came out of the envelope were 2 crescent moon-shaped pieces of paper, the kind where you see at Halloween where the crescent moon is wavy. You've seen that where there's a little waves in the center. So both pieces were wavy, and they were like a jigsaw puzzle, just the 2 of them. I mean, I took those 2 scraps of paper out of the envelope in the dream, and then I put them together. I mean, it was obvious which way they went because there was just writing on one side. When I put those 2 jigsaw-like pieces of the 2 crescent moons together, it morphed into her horoscope, and it was done in blue proofreader's pencil, white paper, blue proofreader's pencil. And of course, in the dream, and then when I woke up, I thought, this is real because of the blue proofreader's pencil. And I can't, because I was recording my dreams, that dream went in the journal. It was all written down. But what happened is it was her chart, and on the side was the rising sign, which can only be interpreted from the birth time. When I got that in my dream, I worked backwards. I took the rising sign to determine what time it occurred on the date of her birth. And so when it gave me a birth time of 8:30 p.m., I thought, okay, that's it. And then so soon after I got that purple card, dear Judith, sorry, not well. My chart's in a bank vault somewhere. I can't get a hold of it, but my birth time is 8:30 p.m. It's exactly what I got in the dream.
You had a special connection with her.
Beyond anything. And then I had a dream which I was privileged to witness, and it's real on a certain level, and it still brings tears to my eyes. This is towards the end. She was on the floor, prostrate, with a long, flowing, deep royal blue cape on, but covering her and just going forever on the floor, rippling, and she's on the floor face down at the throne of God, begging for her life. I had very, very profound experiences with her. And we would, I would tell her, and she would comment on the dreams. And again, at some point she just said, so I will come to you. I will take your hand. Like I said, we will fly together through the skies. She knew there was something unusual enough. And then the other part of the correspondence, which isn't that huge, but it's deep. And what I love, I didn't realize, I just went through her correspondence sometime since you contacted me. I can't say when, but between then and now, and I was rereading it, and I forgot that she was so elated. And I'm going back to I'm going to finish answering your question, because she said something, it's written out, it's right there, in, black and white, that she intentionally brought me into her family. That is the phrase she used. And then she went on about Eduardo and what apparently he wrote her, he was beside himself when he wrote her after he first met me. And she says, that Eduardo carried on. And he said, you were so talented, so attractive, so this, so that. And finally she concluded, she said, you have rejuvenated him, and underlined the word. How I got with Eduardo is she asked me after that horoscope business started up, she said, one day she wrote, she said, I have a cousin in Dallas. He created a number of horoscopes of French writers. He did not interpret their charts. Would you be interested in going to Dallas to the library? I will arrange for you to get in. Well, of course I said yes. And so that's how it began. And meanwhile, this is the best part of the story. It's February of 76 is when I'm going to go. I had written her and I said, asked for Eduardo's contact information. I thought, should I call him while I'm there? And so in her letter, what happened at that point, James Leo Herlihy, the guy that wrote Midnight Cowboy, that was a good friend of hers, was doing her correspondence. He was typing it for her. And so she wrote me a short whatever, and in the body of the letter it said, I will send you his address and whatever. And then at the bottom, he signed it Love Anais, but then underneath that he put down that he, James Leo Herlihy, had typed the letter to that effect. And so I was left with the puzzle. Did she mean never to give me Eduardo's contact information, or did Herlihy forget to enclose it? She said, I will send you his address. Then the next sentence read, but I warn you, he is a recluse. Well, you read that sentence and you think maybe she's just toying with you and maybe she doesn't really want you to contact him, having qualified it that way. So I had no intention of contacting him. And when I got to the library, the secretary to the director had an index card sitting on her desk, and she said, here's Eduardo's address and phone number. Call him. He's a lonely, distinguished gentleman. I'm quoting verbatim from that day. And I thanked her, and I took the card, and I said, I'm not calling him. I wouldn't, because I adored Anais, and whatever she wanted, I would honor. And I thought that's what she wanted. Well, it was, because she was playing with me. But at any rate, I didn't call. Okay. I didn't call. And so one day, Ruth was the secretary. This was a Monday. By Wednesday, she said, Eduardo, he called. You were out to lunch. He called for you. And finally, I thought, okay, the jig is up. And after I finished working in the library that Wednesday, I went to a phone booth. Imagine that, a phone booth near where Eduardo lived, which is near the library, and I called Eduardo. I mean, finally, I have Ruth's card. I thought, he called. She says, Judy, he called. He's looking for you. And I'm standing talking to him, and of course he's, hello, He was always so elegant, and he did not have a Spanish accent at the end of his life. He had gone to Britain and trained himself completely out of an accent. But anyway, hello, and I was just having so much fun in that phone booth because it was established who I was. He goes, I thought when Anais first told me about you that you were just a dirty hippie. I'm quoting verbatim. Then he said, but she sent me your work because I wrote a 40-page interpretation of a horoscope. He says, when I saw what you did for Anais, I knew you are the real thing. I don't remember too much more of the conversation other than he was going to come to the library and meet me, which is what Anais intended all along by withholding that information, because she knew he couldn't stand it, to think somebody was rummaging around in his notes. Well, he was right and she was right, because I found that round and made it public. Anyway, so he came and he sat down briefly. He was dressed very elegantly. He took off his suit jacket. We went up to the area where her stuff was stored. I don't think he was there 10 minutes when he jumped up, and he couldn't tolerate. He was such a recluse. I don't know. He jumped up, put on his jacket, was getting ready to leave. I followed him to the elevator where he had to punch to get out of there, and he's waiting for the elevator. And I thought, oh my God, he's leaving. This is it. I get one chance only to ask him something. What do you think I asked? I said, how is Anais doing? Because she was in the middle of all her treatment, and she'd gotten that interferon, which of course made her sick. She got that from Japan before it was available. Anyway, so I knew she was on interferon. That's all I knew. When I said, how is Anais? He had the most mellifluous voice. You can't even imagine how beautiful it is. At any rate, his answer was, I only hope she's smoking her marijuana, drawn out in his elegant voice. And I thought, what? That's fine, because that's what she had to do to overcome the effects of the interference. Now the elevator is just arriving, and he jerks his head to the right and said to me, after that last statement, will you have dinner with me Friday night? I said, yes, I will. And it went on from there. That's the story of how I met him.
Fantastic story. What a great experience that must have been for you.
A highlight of my life. I've had several unusual and nice, wonderful experiences, but Eduardo clearly is the highlight. And, of course, I spent 15 years with him, and it was quite a journey. It was pretty wonderful, really. Yes, very wonderful. Oh, he was just magnificent. They call, what was that, Lorenzo, one of the Medicis? Lorenzo the Magnificent, Eduardo the Magnificent. That's him. There's just no one like him, ever.
Thank you so much, Judy, for talking to me about Eduardo Sanchez.
Well, Paul, it has meant a great deal to me to be able to talk about him, and I hope everyone out there enjoys the journey with Eduardo, who reads The Round.
The Round is now available at Amazon and other online booksellers in both print and digital formats. This has been the Anais Nin Podcast. Thanks for listening. Until the next time.